Fighting for the faithful. President Donald Trump is the keynote speaker at a United Nations event on religious freedom. We have a report in reaction. Gaining momentum. Democrats are ramping up their calls to begin impeachment proceedings against the president. We're on Capitol Hill. American presence. 2 church leaders from the United States are given prominent roles in the upcoming Synod on the Amazon. And staying in sight. Pope Francis makes a road trip and delivers a message of hope. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. President Trump is calling on the world to end religious persecution and to protect Christians. The president highlighted the plight of persecuted minorities during a keynote speech at the United Nations in New York. White House correspondent Mark Irons has the highlights. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump is the first U.S. president to issue a plea for global religious freedom at the United Nations. Today, he looked back at attacks on a religion around the world and said his administration will do more to help people of faith in the future.
The United States is founded on the principle that our rights do not come from government, they come from God.
Speaking at the United Nations, President Trump says approximately 80% of the world's population live in countries where religious liberty is threatened, restricted, or banned.
As we speak, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, Yazidis, and many other people of faith are being jailed, sanctioned, tortured, and even murdered, often at the hands of their own government.
He mentioned the 2016 murder of a Catholic priest celebrating Mass in Normandy, France, and the past year's shootings in the U.S. at Jewish synagogues in Pennsylvania and California.
Who would believe this is even possible?
The president said his administration is allocating an additional $25 million to protect religious freedom, religious sites, and relics around the world. The president's focus on the persecution of religious minorities, particularly Christians, resonates with his evangelical supporters. Family Research Council President Tony Perkins says President Trump's speech goes beyond talking about international religious freedom to taking tangible steps that will lead to people of all faiths being able to securely and publicly worship. Catholic League President Bill Donahue adds, the next battleground for religious liberty is the workplace. No one should be forced to engage in any religious practice, but neither should they be told to check their beliefs at the office door. President Trump says America stands with believers in every country who simply want to live according to their faith. He's calling on all nations to release prisoners of conscience and repeal laws that restrict religious freedom. Now, tomorrow at the UN, the president will deliver his main speech. Wyatt?
And we'll have full coverage of that and a full report from New York tomorrow. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. And joining me now from New York City is Dr. Thomas Farr, president of the Religious Freedom Institute. Dr. Farr, welcome back to the program. Protecting religious freedom continues to be a priority for the Trump administration. You were there at the UN today for the president's remarks. How were his comments received? What was the response like there in front of people from all around the world?
Well, it was a pretty heady moment, Wyatt. There you had the U.S. ambassador to the UN, the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the President of the United States, and the UN Secretary General in a huge room, standing room only, a lot of people there, probably 250, 300 people. Good response to him, but I want to focus just briefly on the extraordinary circumstance of having all of these people, all of these representatives of our country and the UN Secretary General there, all singing the same song. We got to stop religious persecution around the world, advance religious freedom. It was quite a moment.
The president today referred to acts of violence in sacred places as a wound on all humanity. You and your group have described religious persecution as a global crisis. What are the challenges to getting widespread international support to put a stop to it?
Well, it's a huge problem. It's been there for a long time. We've been working on it a long time, which is one reason I'm so grateful that we now seem to have, for the first time, this kind of deep and broad collaboration within the United States government and with the United Nations. What has to happen is that We've got to get more than governments abroad involved. We need to get civil societies, religious leaders of all religions, and secular leaders involved by convincing them that religious freedom is good for them. And I'm glad to say that we began to see this with the president's speech. I should mention that a lot of this is due to the hard work of Ambassador-at-Large for Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, who was in the background. He wasn't up on the dais until later in the program. But he's the mover and shaker here. These are his ideas, these are his programs, and the fact that the entire United States government is behind him is a credit to him.
In addition to the $25 million the president announced to help protect religious freedom sites and relics, he also announced the formation of a coalition of American businesses to protect religious liberty. You mentioned getting other sectors of society to get involved. What impact do you think potentially the private sector can have on this issue in helping strengthen religious freedom?
Well, it can potentially have an enormous impact to have American corporations, first of all, going out into the places where they are around the world, requiring that their own employees be given religious freedom, but also perhaps providing financial support to organizations in these countries that want to advance religious freedom to make the argument. There are two things going on there. One is you've got an American corporation actually doing this. The other is that you are making an economic argument for religious freedom. And it's self-evident by their doing what they're doing. If you have people enjoying religious freedom, the economy grows. Now that's something that anybody ought to understand, even the Chinese. In fact, I would say especially the Chinese. There was a Chinese Uyghur woman who testified today. So China is a very important target of this kind of policy. So the economic initiative the president announced was very important, very encouraging for those of us who've been working in this vineyard for a long time.
Well, we hope that all of that important message of religious freedom and promoting that will resonate around the world, and hopefully it'll start right here and right now. Dr. Thomas Farr, president of the Religious Freedom Institute, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
President Trump faces growing questions over his phone call with the president of Ukraine. A whistleblower reportedly claims Trump asked the foreign leader to investigate political rival Joe Biden and his son Hunter, who worked for a Ukrainian gas company.
It's just a Democrat witch hunt. Here we go again. They failed with Russia, they failed with recession, they failed with everything, and now they're bringing this up.
President Trump is expected to meet with the Ukrainian president Wednesday at the United Nations. President Trump's witch hunt remarks are not convincing Democrats. They're increasing calls to impeach the president. It comes after a whistleblower in the intelligence community made a formal complaint against Trump. The inspector general says the charge was serious and urgent. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us from Capitol Hill. Jason?
Wyatt, so far the Trump administration is unwilling to hand off that whistleblower complaint to Congress. Speaker Pelosi says she wants to see it by Thursday. This controversy is leading other Democrats to say the time for impeachment is now.
It's a mistake not to impeach this president.
Democrats running for the White House.
We need to absolutely right away begin impeachment proceedings. He's got to go.
Say don't wait for the 2020 election to oust President Trump.
If ever there were a time to impeach and hold the president accountable, it is now.
Good morning.
Speaker Pelosi has urged caution on impeachment.
Yesterday.
Now she writes to all lawmakers, if the Trump administration keeps blocking the whistleblower from sharing the complaint with Congress, the administration will be entering a grave new chapter of lawlessness, which will take us into a whole new stage of investigation. President Trump admits talking about this with Ukraine's president. He says actions during the Obama administration are what need to be investigated.
What Biden did is a disgrace. What his son did is a disgrace. The son took money from Ukraine.
Hunter Biden was on the board of a Ukrainian gas company. And then Vice President Joe Biden pressured the Ukrainian government to fire the prosecutor general, a prosecutor some people accused of not fighting corruption. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin tells CNN it's Biden who needs to be investigated.
Vice President Biden at the time's son did very significant business dealings in Ukraine. I, for one, find that to be concerning. And to me, that's the issue perhaps that should be further investigated.
The former vice president points to 2020.
You should be looking at Trump Trump's doing this because he knows I'll beat him like a drum.
The acting intelligence director is scheduled to testify here in Congress on Thursday. Speaker Pelosi says at that time she expects Joseph McGuire will hand over the whistleblower complaint. She says if the Trump administration doesn't, they'll be breaking the law. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. The trial begins today for two French women accused of plotting to blow up the Notre Dame Cathedral 3 years ago. The suspects appeared in a special Paris court. They are accused of being recruited by ISIS and were set to detonate a car bomb near the iconic Catholic church in 2016. The plot failed and no one was injured. The suspects faced at least 30 years in prison. Pope Francis has chosen 2 Americans to participate in the Synod on the Amazon next month. Cardinal OMalley of Boston and Bishop Robert McElroy of San Diego will take part in the meeting of bishops. A full list of all 185 participants was published by the Vatican this weekend. The Synod will take place October 6th through the 27th. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, can you give us a sense of why Pope Francis may have chosen Cardinal OMalley and Bishop McElroy to be there?
Well, Wyatt, Cardinal OMalley has been one of the closest confidants, advisors to Pope Francis since the Pope was elected in 2013. He's part of this group of 9 cardinals that advise the Pope. Now they're down to 6, but he's still a part of that. And also he's got a deep knowledge of Latinos. He knows both Spanish and Portuguese. He has a doctorate in Spanish and Portuguese literature. He's also known to be very close to migrants and to people who have come to live in his diocese of Boston. Also, if you look at Bishop McElroy, he lives in a border diocese there in San Diego. He also has a degree in political science, another degree in moral theology. Speaking with a Vatican official who was involved in this process of selecting the different people participating in the Synod, he told me today that these 2 also come from the West. They come from the United States. They come from a place where it's seen that the lifestyle and upholding that lifestyle may be to the detriment of the Amazon region. So they wanted to make sure and involve some bishops from these Western nations, also from Europe, to be able to bring back the discussions from the Synod to their home dioceses and nations.
Well, following up with you on that list of members who are going to attend the Synod, what is the list and those who were selected? Tell us about the Holy Father's priorities in general for this meeting.
Well, Wyatt, there are 185 people chosen to participate in the Synod between bishops and experts and other advisors. They come from across the 9 nations that have some part of the Amazon within their borders. So there's a huge presence of bishops from those regions. They're also experts in everything from climate science to economic development and also to human ecology. Also indigenous leaders from throughout the Amazon. There are 20 of them participating, including women leaders. Also, women religious will be participating. All of this serves to show a little bit of what this working document that's going to be guiding the Synod says, that they're looking for new pathways for the Church in the Amazon region and also ways towards an integral human ecology. That's the relationship between nature and man.
Like you say, such a diverse group of people. The appointment of Jeffrey Sachs, a professor of economics at Columbia University, is causing controversy. What are the concerns there?
Well, Wyatt, he's known to be pro-abortion and also pro-population control. Sachs already does have a working relationship with the Vatican. The Pontifical Academy for Sciences has called on him often for his advice and also to co-create different conferences, especially on climate science and economic growth and development. I spoke with a Vatican official, the same official that was involved in selecting the different experts who would be taking part. He said that Sachs was selected in particular for his expertise on economic growth models and also for his work on the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. He said that Sachs won't have a massive influence on this Synod, but for certain issues he will be called on for his advice.
Very interesting. Alan, remind us again, take us back. Explain to us what exactly is a Synod and why is there this focus right now on the Amazon region?
So Wyatt, a synod is a collection of bishops called, convoked by the Pope to examine a certain issue or a geographic area. You'd say anything from the Eucharist or new evangelization to the church in Africa or in the Middle East. In this case, it's a little bit of both. It's geographical in the sense of the Amazon region, but it's also thematic in the sense of this integral human ecology. The Pope wants to build on his encyclical Laudato Si, the care for the common home, and really take a look at a specific region because he sees it as an emergency. Remember, he comes from Argentina. He comes from near there. He knows a lot of the bishops there because he was involved in really a continent-wide meeting of bishops, and so he knows these issues are important, and also he knows that they are emblematic for other regions on Earth. If they can examine the Amazon region and come up with some solutions, they can be applied to many other places on Earth that are suffering.
Well, we with EWTN are following this synod very closely, and we will be there, of course, in October to cover it with a number of reporters, writers, and producers. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up, analysis of the rising tension between the United States and Iran. Plus, what the FBI is saying about the fires at 3 Catholic churches in Texas. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says American sanctions against Tehran have failed. He says Iran has resisted the pressure. Rouhani made the comments ahead of his departure for New York, where he's expected to address the United Nations General Assembly. Tensions remain high between the U.S. and Iran after a missile and drone attack on Saudi Arabia's oil fields earlier this month. The U.S. has accused Iran of carrying out the attack, but Iran denies any involvement. Joining me now to offer his analysis is Blaise Mishtal, fellow at the Hudson Institute. Blaise, welcome back to the newscast.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Strong words from the Iranian president as he heads to U.S. soil. What impact have U.S. sanctions in general had on Iran, and how effective has the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign been?
Look, the sanctions have definitely had an effect in strangling Iran's economy. Its oil exports have plummeted. The amount of money that it has in its coffers to give to the terrorist groups that it supports, like Hezbollah, have definitely shrunk. But it hasn't led to a change in the regime's behavior yet. If anything, it's made the regime more aggressive. So the Trump administration is counting on the fact that the longer these sanctions are in place, the more the regime will be constrained. And so now it's sort of a competition between 2 clocks, the clock of the sanctions having ever more bite and the clock of Iran getting ever more aggressive.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson agrees that Iran was responsible for this month's attacks on the Saudi oil fields, but he's also calling for the U.S. and its allies to strike a new deal with Iran on the nuclear issue to replace the old one. How critical are this week's UN meetings for President Trump in terms of garnering international support to confront Iran?
They are very critical because while there was obviously an economic impact of the strikes that Iran conducted against Saudi Arabia, the real part of what they're trying to do is a diplomatic campaign. They're trying to make themselves look good by denying that this was their attack, saying it's the United States that's being militaristic, making the United States look in doubt to its allies when it calls Iran responsible for them. And then it's going to try to make itself look good through saying, we're really a party for peace here, we're looking to negotiate, we're looking to be a responsible actor. And so this is really, in some effect, a popularity contest about who's going to come out looking better, the United States or Iran. And so it's really important for the United States to have a very effective charm offensive at the UN this week.
Meanwhile, the Iranian president says that his country will invite all Persian Gulf countries to join an Iranian-led coalition to guarantee, quote, to guarantee the region's security. How likely do you think it is that Iran will be able to actually gather enough support for an alliance like this?
Oh, absolutely not, and I think they know it. But again, this is part of their attempt to show that they are the party of peace in the region. And so it's not enough for the U.S. to sort of laugh at this, as we should, and it's not enough for other Middle Eastern countries to reject this outright. We really need to lay out an argument for why Iran is responsible for the conflict and destabilization of the Middle East, and get our European partners to buy into that and say, we're going to work concertedly to pressure Iran to stop this malign behavior.
Tensions remain high. How likely do you think it is that we'll see some sort of U.S. military response against Iran?
I doubt it. I think the Trump administration for now is comfortable letting their maximum economic pressure campaign play out a little longer. And certainly President Trump ran on the promise of both getting a better deal with Iran, but also avoiding further entanglements in the Middle East. And I think he's going to probably weigh more heavily on the latter side of that and be very cautious about the potential for a further conflict.
Okay, we'll be watching some big speeches this week at the United Nations General Assembly. Blaise Mishtal, Fellow at the Hudson Institute, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wyatt.
The FBI says fires at 3 Catholic churches in El Paso, Texas earlier this year were all the result of arson attacks. The Bureau is offering a $15,000 reward for information resulting in an arrest. No one was injured in the attacks, but all 3 churches were damaged. Authorities say in each case, the culprits tossed incendiary devices at the church in order to set them on fire. 2 of the blazes were last May, the 3rd was in June. Up next, Pope Francis tells the faithful why they shouldn't judge others. Monsignor Walter Rossi has taken a leave of absence from the Board of Trustees at the Catholic University of America. His stepping away comes at the same time he's under investigation for unspecified allegations of misconduct. The probe into Monsignor Rossi was launched jointly by the Archdiocese of Washington and the Diocese of Scranton. During his leave of absence, Rossi will not participate in any board activities. He serves as the rector of the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. A federal judge is set to hear arguments in a challenge to Georgia's new pro-life law. The measure bans abortion once a baby's heartbeat is detected. The ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and other groups are asking the plan to be delayed until after their legal challenge is considered. The state argues the law is constitutional and should take effect as planned January 1st. And in Tennessee, a judge is set to hear opening statements in a lawsuit challenging the state's 48-hour waiting period before an abortion. 5 of the Tennessee's 7 abortion clinics filed the suit. They say the measure violates the Constitution. Attorneys for the state say the plan allows women time to reflect on their decision.
Ricorrerà la giornata mondiale del migrante e del rifugiato.
Pope Francis invites the faithful to participate in next week's World Day of Migrants and Refugees. During his Sunday address to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father also reflected on yesterday's gospel, saying people are worth more than possessions, and we should spend our money in ways that help others. Finally tonight, Pope Francis made a road trip on Saturday, and he says Jesus never loses sight of us despite the obstacles that keep us from him.
Ma non agli occhi di Gesù, che chiama per nome proprio lui, Zaccheo.
During a visit to the city of Albano to mark the anniversary of the church becoming a minor basilica, the Holy Father says no one is lost to our Lord, not even Zacchaeus the tax collector, and he asked the faithful to take the same approach and not judge people, even if we think they are sinners. Sounds like some sound advice from the Holy Father. And that concludes our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. We leave you tonight with more images from the Holy Father's visit to the city of Albano. Good night, and God bless.
Ma non agli occhi di Gesù, che chiama per nome proprio lui. Cercava di vedere Gesù, quell'incontro, tutti mormoravano. Cari fratelli e sorelle, di andare da chi è più dimenticato, cioè nella Chiesa, a casa sua, ma non con noi.